obviously, losing my dad, I've spoken about this a lot, privately to you guys and you and my friends, and also on the record in terms of blogs I've written for Savanta and stuff about the impact that it had on me in terms of work, and it was huge, and not a day goes really by where I don't think about him, and particularly when I'm on telly, because he would record them all. But yeah, I think that's absolutely the sort of fundamental thing that's had a big impact on me.
Hello everyone, I'm Matt Saines and welcome to my podcast, People Behind Brands, brought to you by Making Websites Better. In each episode, I'm joined by an inspirational guest to hear more about their individual life lessons and how it shaped them into who they are today. To never miss an episode, subscribe to our exclusive content now and follow us on our social media platforms. People Behind Brands, life lessons from the world of business. For episode 41, I'm delighted to welcome my good friend Chris Hopkins from political research brand Savanta. During this episode, we discuss fond memories of lads' holidays and our adolescent youth, as well as touching upon Chris's political career, where he regularly features on news outlets such as BBC News broadcasting voters' opinions on the political landscape. In recent years, Chris has personally experienced the hardest time in his life when he lost his dad Gary to cancer 3 years ago. Chris bravely opens up about his grief and how his family and friends gave him the strength and support network to carry on. In amongst Chris's career achievements, we also cover his dedication to raising money for charities close to his heart, in particular the Huntington's Disease Association, after our friend Matt Saines was diagnosed. A heartfelt, warm interview with a very good friend of mine. Let's get to know the life and career of Mr Chris Hopkins.
The man, the myth, the legend, Chris Hopkins. A very warm welcome to you, mate. How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, very well, thank you, Mark. Very well. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all. Really good to have you on. It's obviously been a while, so yeah, good to have you on. So to start off with, Chris and I have long been friends from school, enjoying lads' holidays abroad in our early 20s to where we find ourselves today. So I really wanted to get Chris on the podcast for his own interview, as this is a man who has experienced many highs in his career in politics, working his way up to his current position as political research director at Savanta, a market research and advisory company. You may have heard or seen Chris on news outlets such as the BBC News, GBN, Al Jazeera Network, and many more, discussing the political landscape Great Britain finds itself in today. Chris often projects the findings of his interesting and worthwhile political research, whilst also helping to build the Savanta brand within the political sphere. Beyond his professional achievements and experience, we also touch upon Chris's life lessons from his personal journey, which have involved hardship and family loss, as well as doing his bit for charity. So, mate, I mean, what better way to start this conversation than to discuss and look back on how we know each other? So keep it clean, for a little sense of it is. What are some of your highlights of things we've done together?
Yeah, that's pretty difficult, isn't it? To keep it clean. No, I mean, yeah, I guess like the first, I don't think we were in any classes at school, but obviously like we went to the same school from age 11, and I guess you just get used to knowing who's about and stuff, and we probably played football at lunchtime a fair number of times, but yeah, I guess it was more really when we left school and started playing football more on a Friday afternoon after respective colleges, and obviously after once we turned 18 and going to the pub and whatnot, was it become because we lived essentially around the corner from each other, didn't we? Yeah. So our local was the same, and it really become kind of not just a hub for me and you, but for all of our mates that were, we had a lot of mates really in walking distance, didn't we? And that was all really helpful. So yeah, it become a big thing Friday nights down the locals. So yeah, and then I think like the major memories are always going to be those holidays, aren't they? And I think you get to know people in a different way, almost like their true selves on holiday, I think. We've obviously roomed together on a few, but we must have been like on 5 or 6, I think, together. So a couple of them football trips, a couple of them a bit more bit more lively, I guess, let's say. And yeah, no, they've always been really good fun, and yeah, I'm sure that the listeners would want to know a few stories, but I'll keep them PC. But yeah, all I'll say is that Mark does not miss an episode of EastEnders, home or abroad.
Yeah, well, it's always better when you can borrow someone's shower gel and have a bath afterwards. So
yeah, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's been some good times, mate. But I mean, in all the years that I've known you, I don't think I've ever really asked you, but I am genuinely interested in how you carved out your career to date. So perhaps you can give us an insight into how it all started for you, and obviously your experience within that.
Yeah, of course. So I studied politics at sixth form college. I think when I went to sixth form college in Colchester, I wanted to do psychology. I thought I'd go to uni to do psychology, but I went to study politics at sixth form, aged 16. I don't think it's offered as a GCSE anywhere, and a lot of sixth forms don't offer it. So yeah, but I was lucky that R1 did. It really just kind of got me hooked, I think. And then when you go through the process of UCAS applications and all that nonsense, I think it became pretty apparent pretty early on that I wanted to study politics at uni. Got into the University of Hull, which offered a particular type of politics degree called British Politics and Legislative Studies. It was a 4-year course with a guaranteed year placement working in Westminster in Parliament. Which was a great experience for me. I think really kind of helped the CV further down the line. But yeah, my role really now is the director of political research at a market research and brand research agency, of which politics is a really small part of that. But I think at university, choosing to do a dissertation and extended research project in my third year that had a statistical element really probably separated me and put me on the path that I'm on. I don't think that had I done a more literature review based dissertation where I was kind of collating sources and coming into a conclusion rather than doing primary statistical analysis as part of it, I don't think I'd have probably found my first role, which was for a polling agency called Savanta. So yeah, joined them in 2014, the week of the Scottish independence referendum. So that was a real baptism of fire. Pretty much fresh out of uni. I was 22, I think, just turned 22 when I got my first sort of graduate job. No gap years here, just straight into work. And then obviously some of your listeners will obviously be aware of what has befallen British politics since then. Some, I guess, kind of feel like 2014, the Scottish independence referendum, was a bit of a catalyst for some of the madness that we since have. I think maybe 2010 was, and the coalition was in some way the real kind of catalyst for the next 14 years as we are now. But yeah, I think that's led to we're recording this the day after my fourth general election was announced. Obviously there was the independence referendum, but also Brexit was massive, and obviously the global pandemic from a political and policy viewpoint, and what's fallen out through Partygate and whatnot has obviously been a really intense time to be in my career. And yeah, I'm sort of 10 years into my career now, and I don't think in any other era or other quite had the same political exposure. But yeah, I guess more specifically on the job, we measure public opinion. I think that's the key. Yes, sort of trying to predict elections is part of it, but that's in theory once every 5 years. We are measuring public opinion and public attitudes and public perceptions of politicians, politics, and policy throughout.
How is it you actually conduct that research, though?
Yeah, so generally it's all online. Respondents sign up to take part in basically like market research panels. They tend to get points or pennies really for taking surveys. I think there's the nation's favourite non-politician, Martin Lewis, the money man. I think he's got a bit on his website. It's just like, how can you earn a bit of extra cash by doing surveys? And that's essentially kind of like some of the online panels that we tap into to do this, and yeah, just send the surveys out via email and wait for your responses basically, and then collate them and do some statistical wizardry behind the scenes, which is frankly conducted by people a lot more intelligent than me. But then yeah, I'm yeah, it's my job really to both communicate those results to clients when we're working on behalf of clients, and also to the public when we're just trying to broadcast our own findings and get our name out there.
Yeah, so I think when you think about your career and your purpose at Savanta, I mean, why do you do what you do? You know, what would you say is your purpose? You know, what do you get the kicks out of being in this political sphere?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm a politico through and through. Really, I think when you get hooked on something at a young age, you know, whether that's a hobby or something that ends up being your career, it is kind of, you know, difficult to shake, I guess. And yeah, I've always been really interested in the process side of things, not maybe the theory as much. I think some of the political theory is kind of passed me by, but you know, when I was working in Parliament, it was the processes that kind of interested me. And political and public opinion is different from that, but you know, it does allow you an insight into voters ultimately. And I think that you hear a lot of garbage, frankly, from politicians and from journalists about what they think is important, when really, like, the greatest arbiter of a politician's success is not themselves, but is of the public and those that vote them in every 5 years. And I think being able to kind of like have that, you know, kind of ear to the floor of the nation in some, and it sounds really grandiose, but I think it's kind of it. Like, you know, I think I'm as plugged into what voters want as anyone, and I think that is, you know, so it's kind of quite a privileged position to be in, but it does give you sort of an emotional intelligence, I think, to kind of weed your way through some of the BS in politics and yeah, sort of navigate some of the stickier and trickier moments. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning. I mean, frankly, you know, we love the drama and we love the chaos as much as the next person. You know, even if it does mean that we're working all hours and you have to drop things at a hat. You know, if we didn't love the drama and the chaos, then we'd be in the wrong game, I think.
Yeah, part of your role was involved appearing on, you know, news outlets, on live TV. So how do you feel about that side to your role?
Yeah, I love it. It's not something that I ever thought I would. But yeah, I really enjoy it, and I think it comes sometimes when you say that it sounds a little bit big-headed, and you kind of want to be the center of attention and want to be on camera and stuff. But I think for me, it's just like once you scrub away the camera, and I guess to some extent, you know, when I've really started doing these a lot of it has been, you know, speaking virtually online anyway. So you kind of take the fear factor out of it, but you know, realistically, it's just having a conversation about something that you know a lot about, and yeah, you know, I think if you like I say, if you try and scrub away, and this is easier said than done, don't get me wrong, but if you scrub away the idea that it's going to be broadcast to potentially millions of people, then it is just a one conversation about something that in theory I'm well versed in, and I'm more than qualified to speak about. So yeah, I do enjoy it, but you know, there is also that sort of brand ambassador side to things that, you know, I'd be remiss to say I don't enjoy. You know, people do describe me as the face of Savanta, and you know, I'm not particularly senior within the organization. You know, we've got a lot of much more senior people than me, namely our CEO and our board, but I've been given this trust to speak on politics and to speak on polling and to speak on our research and communicate that to the nation, and that's a really, you know, that's a massive vote of confidence. It's a real you know, it's a real kind of credit to myself, but also to the business that they've entrusted me to do that. And yeah, it is something that I do kind of enjoy and get a bit of a kick out of. That said, I think again, it's massively helpful that, like, I'm presented on television or radio as an expert. I'm not really there to be tripped up. I don't get loads of difficult questions. And I think if we don't know, or if we haven't researched something, that's kind of okay. So, I don't think I'd enjoy it as much if I was under the spotlight or under a lot of scrutiny. That said, obviously, with a general election and accuracy, that can be the case for our industry. So you've got to be prepared for that. But I think that is, a really small part of what I might possibly be asked to do. And generally, it's just having conversations like this with people like you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you just touched upon, what's happening in the, sort of coming days and what's happened previously as well in the last few days. But, if I could ask you to give your own opinion on kind of the political landscape as it is today, obviously with Rishi's recent comments, the general election, all that sort of stuff, what would be your opinion and how do you see it evolving in the future?
Yeah, I mean, look, so obviously I can't really give my opinion, I guess, on that, but I can analyze it in based on what we know. I think that the election campaign that we're just starting, when this goes out, we might well be in the middle of, is it has the ability to change things, but at the minute, polling is a nowcast. It's not a forecast. So if there was a general election tomorrow, we would very much believe that the Conservatives would be on for an absolute pasting. And I think they've only got themselves to blame for that, to be honest. I think through the last 3 years, we've seen prime ministers and politicians and characters, frankly, that believe they have a divine right to lead. And I think that has often been their undoing. I think there's a real lack of humility, and this might well be across the parties. It probably is, but we've only got evidence recently of it really being in the Conservative Party. And I think that that's caused their brand to really go through the floor. I think that Boris Johnson and Partygate, whether you believe that Partygate was overblown or whether you think it's the most heinous crime, I think that the fact that he let it drag on for so long without ever really confessing to any culpability is what did the damage for him in the end. Yeah. And ironically, it wasn't Partygate that really was the sort of the final nail in his coffin, but it massively contributed to there being something else that he could have ridden out had it not been such a turbulent 6 or 7 months previously. I think then Liz Truss is still, frankly, refusing to admit that she got anything wrong during her ill-fated 45 or 46 days as Prime Minister. And I think that she is massively responsible for the malaise that the party find themselves in going into this general election. She stood by her beliefs, and I do agree with that to some extent, but I think she massively misjudged the timing and the impact of some of the economic changes she wanted to make. It spooked the banks, and it caused interest rates and therefore mortgage rates to go up, and all of a sudden the Conservative Party were unpopular with their base, which is, you can be unpopular with your opposition's base as much as you want, but if you're unpopular with your dyed-in-the-wool voters, then you really are hiding to nothing. And then Rishi Sunak has failed to remedy any of that, and I think that he's also set himself some bold and ambitious targets that he's failed to deliver on. So we've now got a Conservative Party going into a general election campaign that has a poor record on trust, a poor record on competence, and a poor record on delivery. Flip that to Labour. They're untested. There is an ambivalence towards them. There is a skepticism towards them, but it's not as powerful as the distrust that a lot of voters feel towards the Conservative Party, and that's put them in a real difficult position. That said, things can change during this election campaign, but the gap that the Tories have to make up, frankly, is so large now that it's really difficult to see what they can do to move that. And a lot of the questions that I've been asked in the last 24 hours are really quite presumptuous about what's going to happen in the next 6 to 8 weeks. I think there is a feeling that the polls will narrow, and that there will be, and that this ambivalence towards Labour is going to manifest itself in in voters flooding back to the Conservative Party. But like, you know, I try to be as neutral as I can on this, and just, you know, think about it. If I was an average voter, but if I was to see Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer debate one another and come out and say who's the most competent looking leader, I think there's only one winner, and it's the guy that used to be a barrister.
Yeah.
What a surprise, right? So yeah, I think that there's nothing to say that this election campaign can change things, and maybe the polls will narrow, but they could go the other way too, because I do not think that Rishi Sunak has the skill, frankly, to fight a strong election campaign, and therefore I think the Tory party are on a real hiding to nothing.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to sort of hear your thoughts on kind of young voters, because you know, I'm sure you'll be able to tell me the kind of stats behind it all, you know, probably for another discussion. But it seems to me that many of the younger generation are becoming quite disillusioned with politics in general. So what would be your advice to younger voters, and why would you encourage them to essentially use their vote in the right way?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it does matter, but I think it always feels, you know, individuals feel very nebulous in the grand scheme of things, right? And I do totally understand that. But you know, these things matter, and ultimately the choice that is being faced by the nation on the 4th of July now is between, you know, a Conservative government with their own principles and beliefs and a Labour government with their own principles and beliefs. And I think some would maybe argue that, you know, there's not loads to choose between them. But I think that is in itself a powerful message that the Labour Party have to utilise and use, because if you don't believe that there's much between them in terms of policy, then there is perhaps evidence to suggest, and I think that the public do believe this, that there is a difference in terms of competence and ability. And I think that is, you know, in some respects, the managerial aspect is kind of what's going on behind the scenes of this general election. Is you know, whether you believe that Britain can be a great country again, or whether you believe that economically or socially Britain's in a great position, is kind of irrelevant. It's who you want to manage that success or that decline, depending on your point of view. So I think it is important. You know, younger people and younger voters are doing some really interesting things, and you know, I'd happily go on the record and say I think some quite concerning things, particularly among young men. You know, I think we are seeing some disillusionment, but we're also seeing from those that are engaged an incredibly high level of engagement. And I think that that's incredibly positive. I think that you know, the British political system is set up to favour two large parties that, and generally they're always going to, you know, have policy platforms that are going to favour their voters that will never be young people en masse unless there is a change. But equally, you know, it's the chicken and egg situation. Do young voters have to vote en masse before they are taken notice of, or should they be taken notice of to encourage them to vote? It's a, you know, it's a really kind of difficult dilemma. But you know, I think in terms of, and I think I would encourage young voters to think about it less along the lines of Westminster and the parties. Think about it in terms of issues. Think about it in terms of what you care about, because you know, you might care from a left-wing point of view, you might care really about the environment, which party is the best for you on that. You might really care about your local area. You might care about climate change. You might care about you know, the war in the Middle East or the war in Russia and Ukraine. You know, from the slightly different point of view, you might really care about getting on the property ladder. You might really care about rent control or the affordability and availability of housing. You might really care about transport. You might really care about infrastructure and opportunities and employment and tax. So think about it in that sense, and maybe less away from the Punch and Judy show that can be Westminster. And I think the final thing I do want to touch on, if all right, is that we are seeing in our research, and you know, increasingly unexpected views from young men. And I think that there is a massive danger for policymakers, but also just socially, I think, in this country and across the globe, particularly in the Western world, about this sort of. I don't want to hold him up as a sort of messiah / martyr, but I think we're seeing the Andrew Tateification of young men and young men's views. I think we are seeing, having made so much social progress in terms of the views of women, the views of the LGBT community, with the T increasingly, I guess, problematic, and from a policy point of view in the UK, which there's still a lot of progress to be made, but and also just in terms of economics and finance and tax and loads of things. Andrew Tate's views are incredibly influential, but also incredibly backwards in my view, and I think that's something that there is a real danger of, because I think there is a gap in this country for a populist party, for a populist movement that is not the beer swilling Nigel Farageism, which is focused so much on immigration and very little else. I think there is a young populist movement, particularly fueled by young men, that could really take hold, that would say some popular and maybe some common sense things, but also have some real dangerous undertones. And I think that's something that is on the horizon and really needs to be thought about by political strategists and policymakers.
I appreciate that. I think it's certainly an important area. Certainly young voters using their vote in the right way, however they want to use that, or what they deem to be right. But moving on to your personal life and all that comes with it. Our podcast is founded upon honesty and how testing times have impacted, good or bad, on our personal and working lives. So can you tell us about a challenging time in your life that made you who you are today?
There's been a lot of, I guess, sort of adversity in recent years, and I think it's probably the time to speak about the loss of my dad. That's been the one fundamental thing that has shaped me. But more broadly, I didn't grow up in a working class background necessarily. Both of my parents were service workers, but it was a lower middle class background. I was the first person in my family to go to university. School trips were not always things that we could afford. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't breadline. So I feel like saying that I was working class is probably a little bit too far the other way. But there was always something instilled in me that I think my parents really wanted to pay it forward. I think it was about making my life better than theirs and the opportunities that I had. And I don't really know when consciously I took that on, but I must have done, because going to university was huge in terms of just growing up, really, and kind of being away from home and doing stuff for yourself for the first time. But also it's been a massive influence in my career. But obviously losing my dad. I've spoken about this a lot, privately to you guys and you and my friends, and also on the record in terms of blogs I've written for Savanta and stuff about the impact that it had on me in terms of work, and it was huge, and not a day goes really by where I don't think about him, and particularly when I'm on telly, because he would record them all. But I think that's absolutely the sort of fundamental thing that's had a big impact on me.
I remember there was an article that you wrote, and it was probably one of the most poignant pieces of text I've ever seen. I don't know whether it's because I know your dad and all that sort of stuff, but it really did sort of hit home, and just how much of a great guy he was, but also your I suppose your struggle going through it all, really. But and it's only been a couple of years, really, isn't it, since Gary's passing? But your dad was a great guy and someone I know you really looked up to. So tell us a little bit more about his impact on your life.
My dad was a relatively straightforward kind of person to get a gauge on, but he was quiet, and he was relatively unambitious. He didn't necessarily have the same kind of personality traits that I've got. But he did like a laugh too, and yeah, I think the only kind of thing that really that he's definitely shaped is like, he was always incredibly proud of me. I think that really kind of like, that you feel that, and that, even if it doesn't consciously motivate you, I think that you kind of it's there all of the time. And I could have not gone to university and I could have not done XYZ and he would have still been proud of me. It was very unconditional, I think. But yeah, he definitely has kind of taught me to be quite rational and quite considered in the way I approach things. I am sometimes, I think, especially among our group of friends, kind of known as like the more negative person, but I think it's kind of more as a, I want us to consider all available options and come to the right conclusion before rushing into anything and being a bit irrational. I think that's kind of where that's to my dad's credit. But yeah, he would struggle to do the hours that I put into my job. Like, put really bluntly, he hated being away from home. I don't really think he was ambitious. I think once he was comfortable financially in his life, he was pretty set. So yeah, that's not really kind of something that I think that we shared. But yeah, I think it's part of that paying it forward. It's like taking what he did and sort of building on it and going to the next step and maybe the step beyond that as well. And I think that's kind of a bit of a grounding that I guess starts at home, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I always find it quite rare when you meet people, because you often meet people and they've got a brother or sister or they've got siblings, multiple, right? But you and I, and there's a few of others in our group, where we actually are only children, and you don't really see that often. So when something like that happens, like obviously with your dad, how much of an effect does that have on an only child? I know you're not a child now, but the point being is that you were his only son. So
yeah, no, it was massive. It was massive, I think, because you didn't really feel as though you could shoulder the load with anyone, either emotionally or administrative. Like, frankly, it was left. I still haven't done stuff from my dad's passing. It was nearly, it's 3 years this September that need to be done from an administrative point of view. And I don't even think that's kind of like me putting it off for a grief process. It's just time sometimes, and they all slip down the list. But yeah, it did feel quite isolating. I think that I'm not going to speak on how families feel during this period, because it is, it's different for everyone. And I'm sure that some families can be incredibly supportive. Some siblings especially can be incredibly supportive. But I think also sometimes you can have elements of like competitive grief where, a sibling feels as though they're grieving it in a more appropriate way or a different way. And I think that there can be some real difficult moments when a parent passes, when you've got brothers and sisters. So in some respects, I was really grateful that I was able to just not have any of that burden. But equally, I felt very alone, because my grief was different to my mum's, and was different to my dad's partner, and was different to my dad's sister, and was different to, they'd lost a brother and a husband and a partner and an uncle and whatever. But no one had lost their dad, and while I couldn't put myself in their shoes, they definitely couldn't put themselves in mine. So yeah, it was isolating, but I'm not 100% convinced that having siblings can always lead to a better outcome, frankly, because you see it play out, don't you? You see arguments, and you see, one thing that I would say that is universal is that it's an incredibly stressful period of time, and we all say things that we don't always mean and whatnot. So emotionally it's incredibly heightened. But yeah, I'm not convinced that I was ever at sort of and not that your question implied this, but I don't necessarily feel as though I was at a disadvantage for being an only child. And I don't think it's something for only children to to fear from an emotional point of view, but yeah, the administrative burden is very much on you and you alone, and that is quite daunting.
Yeah. In recent years, you've done your bit for charity, obviously, running marathons in memory of obviously your late dad, charities such as the British Heart Foundation, but also supporting the great work of the Huntington's Association, and in particular highlighting the awareness of the disease our friend Matt Saines has been diagnosed with in recent years. So tell us your reasons for doing this and obviously why you wanted to get involved.
Yeah, look, let's not beat around the bush. I think anyone that does things for charity has an element of sort of ego about it. So there's no point in denying that, right? I like putting myself through stress, I think, sometimes, and I think that some of these wilder challenges that I've come up with, have probably been bitten off a bit more than I can chew. But I think. I don't want to make this a kind of like a referendum or do down any of the great work of large charities in the UK, because they do some amazing stuff. But when you've got a guy that you've known since you were 4 years old that's diagnosed with an incredibly rare disease with no cure, where so much charity and healthcare funding is pushed towards cancer and heart disease and other things, even in terms of other neurological diseases, it's MS, it's other stuff, which I understand because more people are affected by them. But I think I felt more of a duty or a responsibility to do something. And I don't live in Colchester anymore, which is where Matt and his family live. Chances of seeing him and visiting him are slim, but equally, if I'm honest, I don't love it. I don't love seeing that. I'd rather remember Matt in a different way, I think, but still want to feel as though I can do something. And the Huntington's Disease Association is an incredible charity. It's an incredibly small charity that relies, solely on fundraising, really, and has really kind of kicked that on in the last few years. But yeah, we've done some. I've done a couple. Well, I've done a marathon for them. I've done a marathon for Open Road, which is another small charity based in Colchester and North Essex about drug and alcohol misuse. And yeah, I guess the sort of the big one was the relay that 6 of us ran to Newcastle from Colchester. A week in a minibus doing sort of half marathons every day. And there are people that have done more difficult challenges. Thinking of the hardest geezer doing Africa and all that stuff, and Kevin Sinfield and whatnot. So I'm not saying that it was it was the most difficult thing I've done in my life, but like it was great just to be in that minibus for a week with my mates doing something good. And we raised, I think, nearly 12 grand, and I think overall we're probably near 15 grand since we've been doing all of these things. And I think even if Matt doesn't directly benefit, people that are living with HD like Matt, and I think is the fact that it's also for me personally, it's the fact that we're doing charity work for a charity that is focused on support services and not necessarily scientific research to find a cure. Not that is in any way less valid or less necessary, but just like it costs so much money. And I think that we have to be realistic in this country about the defects in the health service and the shortcomings that they have, but support is needed. And I think that if we can provide through donations and fundraising the stuff that makes people that have this incurable disease that can make their life easier and their quality of life better, I think that is really, really important. So yeah, it's a real great thing. But I've done 2 marathons now. I don't know if I'll do any more. I think my fundraising days might be over, so I might look into volunteering instead, because I don't know if I can pound the pavements anymore, and I'm not throwing myself out of a plane, I can tell you that for nothing.
Well, do you think, like, obviously, because you said that like you like a challenge, and I think from what I can kind of see, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but Do you think that like some of the charity work that you're doing, whether it's been for like running for your dad, running for Matt, do you think that's some of it is a little bit like a coping mechanism, especially when you're doing it with your mates as well, because they're all kind of doing it as well with you?
No, it's just stupid, Mark. I think it's just masochism. Like, I don't think so. Yeah, I started running because I couldn't get a five-side team together in London, and it was free. And didn't have a lot of cash, and I think that's I don't love it. I'm not going to sit here and say that I do. I posted recently about my London Marathon. I think you get a lot of sort of hoopla after the London Marathon of everyone saying, "Oh yeah, it was amazing, best day of my life," and they've forgotten when they have to go out and do a long run in pitch black January when it's snowing. And I didn't love that, and I didn't love the race day is great. I'm not going to sit here and criticize the London Marathon as an event, because race day is great, but for me, race day doesn't outweigh the rest of it. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's coping. It's more practical. It's like I can't sit on my backside and do my job and eat what I want without going out for a run in the end. And then because of race day, especially when you're doing 10Ks and stuff that are distances that are a bit more manageable, oh, maybe I'll give the marathon a go, and maybe I'll do it for a charity that means a lot. And then you live to regret it somewhat. I think halfway through the training. So no, it's definitely more masochism than anything else.
Yeah, so I mean, amongst other hobbies and interests, football is obviously a topic we discuss at length when we meet up. Obviously, your dad was a Liverpool fan and a Cole U fan, so talk to us about the importance of sort of continuing that kind of support, not just for your dad, but also it's your local team. I know you don't live in Culture anymore, but obviously it's your local team. So, what affiliation have you had with that over the years?
Yeah, I'm going to be really conscious now, because obviously you are, and I'm sure every listener knows that you're a big Ipswich Town fan, and you've let's say experienced more recent and historical success than I could ever dream of. And obviously the underlying kind of narrative is that Ipswich and Colchester, if they're not the biggest rivals, especially from your point of view, there's a jealousy and an envy from our point of view that breeds a rivalry. Plus, it is geographically close, I guess. I mean, look, I think when you meet people that don't get it, they're always like, "Why do you support Colchester?" And I'm just like, "Well, they chose me." It's like the Sorting Hat in Harry Potter, right? It's like they chose me. And again, I don't know about you, because obviously when we were growing up, Ipswich were in the Prem for a bit. But I flirted with Premier League teams. I liked Man United when I grew up, and I went to Chelsea with my uncle for a bit and bought the shirt because I was going 6-7 times a season. But I think eventually I just kind of saw the light, really, and saw that this team was for me. And I'm actually really conflicted, I think, as an adult about where I stand on supporting your local team, because I think on the one hand, you should. I get like the traditional old school person in me thinks that you should, and every child should be made to support their local team, and it's kind of a postcode lottery at the end of the day. But then equally, like, the gap is so different and so huge now between like Colchester and the Premier League that, like, if you want to go support a Premier League team because you think that's a better product and it's more entertaining, then who am I to begrudge you? I think that I think there's also like a bit of a snobbery about like supporting your local team that I don't love. That said, and I'm going to contradict myself slightly now, I don't honestly believe that a Man United fan that doesn't live in Manchester, or even, frankly, an Ipswich Town that doesn't live or isn't from Ipswich, can enjoy the promotion or the success in the same way that I can enjoy my team's success, because you don't have the connection to the town and the people and the community. A Colchester promotion to the Championship in 2006 meant more for my town than a stereotypical new Manchester City fan winning the Premier League. and it just does. I don't think that you can understand that until you feel both sides. So yeah, but yeah, equally, I can't begrudge people doing a bit of glory hunting. Like I can't, because you know, it's life's, my Colchester United fandom has not been littered with success. I think I think you and I are basically support the only teams in the '92 that haven't been to the new Wembley in 20 years. You know, we haven't had. I think we Colchester now out of the '92 have had the second longest stint without a promotion. You know, it's not been good, but you know, you keep coming back because it's your team, and there's an allegiance, and there's a loyalty, and there's a maybe a bit of masochism in there as well that just keeps coming back. And I think you come back as well because you hope that one day it will be better. And you know, I've seen so many teams that Colchester have played, Man City being one of them, I guess, that have gone on to have incredible success. But even the smaller clubs, you know, the Blackpools that got to the Premier League, the Brentford that managed to get to the Premier League, Swansea that got to the Premier League. You know, why not us one day? So I think that's kind of why you keep coming back, and yeah. But you have to also just be happy with your lot sometimes. If that's a League Two relegation battle year on year, then that's the cards I've been dealt.
Of course, you're not the only celebrity in your family recently. Your girlfriend Imelda's sister also featured on Interior Design Masters recently. So what was it like watching her and her journey unfold on the show, both for you and Imelda?
Yeah, I mean, I'm real, really. Like, you know, as we say, I do a bit of telly, but I do like a 5-minute interview on, you know, on the news channels. Like, you know, Roisin was thrown into primetime BBC One, and that is massive. Like, you know, 1.8 million people watched the final, where she was, you know, essentially crowned that year's best amateur interior designer in the country. It's an outrageous accolade, and yeah, you know, we all feel incredibly proud of her. You know, I'm not sure how many of the listeners will have watched the show, but like, you know, Roisin came from being essentially a travel advisor, had no interior design background, but I think what we saw on the show was that she might not necessarily have had the same level of like practical skills that some of the contestants with more experience had. There was a kind of, you know, interior design master meme that when she admitted that she'd never screwed a light bulb in before, and so it's, you know, it's a you know, exaggerated example, but you know, there were guys on there that were graphic designers and that had used the lathe before and could build their own furniture and stuff. Roisin didn't have any of that, but I think what she absolutely had, and I think this is where her talent shines through in quite an incredible way, is that she's got an eye for stuff. She's just got this like innate, well, maybe it isn't innate, but like she's got this keen design eye, and I think she can visualize what her room and her space is going to look like before she's even walked into it. And I think that's what won it for her. But I think the other thing that won it for her, and I think this is a huge lesson for anyone in their career and their life, is that she was one of the only ones sometimes that listened and took on feedback. There were contestants on that show that were so wedded to their ideas and wedded to being right that it proved their downfall when it went wrong. And Roisin went on a real journey from being a complete novice, not just an amateur, but a complete novice, to being the most to being the best amateur interior designer in the country. And she did that because every week she got detailed feedback from 2 experts and learned and took all of that advice on. And I think that was, you know, you could see the journey that she went on, and yeah, you know, obviously my partner as her sister is incredibly proud and unbelievably happy, but yeah, you know, from my point of view, a little bit farther removed, you couldn't be more prouder of what she's achieved.
Yeah, I mean, just on that topic of Imelda, I mean, before we come to the end of the episode, I mean, just how much of a rock has she been to you over the years? Obviously, you know, through hardships, but also, you know, some of your successes as well. So, I mean, she's generally, honestly, like one of the nicest people that you could ever meet, and has always essentially got time for everyone. So, you know, I think, tell us a little bit about that kind of constant support that you receive from her.
Yeah, she is. She's the kindest person I've ever met in my life,
Mm.
and I think that is the the fundamental and simplest but accurate way to describe my partner. She is the kindest person I've ever met in my life.
Mm.
And that kindness manifests itself in, as you say, in so many ways. She is a real kind of ray of sunshine. She is always smiling, almost always positive. She feels bad when she isn't smiling and positive, which is, speaks to her. She's a nurse, which from a professional point of view, as well as an emotional point of view, was incredibly helpful when my dad was diagnosed with cancer and when he passed. She was incredibly supportive and understanding, and was also frankly dealing with her own grief at that time. I can't imagine what it would be like to see your partner go through that. It must be awful, and she was dealing with that as well, but while also retaining and holding down a full-time job and just being an absolute superstar. And even professionally, Imelda had influences on me that she doesn't know. She is. I kind of got two groups of mates, right? One is the one with you in that back in Colchester, and we go on boys' holidays to the Euros, and we watch a lot of football, and we're all doing well in our respective careers and stuff. But it is, it's a friendship that's historic, I guess, more than like shared interests sometimes, apart from perhaps sport. Then now I've got my group of mates from London and from university, and we're all politicos. We all either studied or have now found jobs in politics, and Imelda's a normal person, what I like to call a normal person. She is the average voter in so many ways and shape or form. She's not politically engaged. She's not particularly politically aware, but we'll watch the news sometimes and she'll say what she thinks of stuff. And she's kind of like that. She is in a microcosm, in human form, a microcosm of my job. She's influenced questionnaire design, some research projects without even knowing it, and I think that she provides that in a nutshell. But also she's just grounding, and I remember having a conversation with my first boss once, and I've always been a bit like this, but Imelda really does facilitate this for me, where he was like, "Oh, are you going to go home tonight and watch Newsnight?" And I'm like, "No, I've lived Newsnight. Like when I arrived in the office this morning to when I'm going home to watch Love Island." And I think that's kind of what Imelda facilitates for me. It is the opportunity to completely switch off from work. She's not going to ask me about, I'm not going to go home to have a debate about the inner workings of the Labour Party, whereas I would with some, and it's not because she's not political in the broadest sense of the word. She has her views. She's, as I say, she's a nurse. She's a trade union member, but it's not it's not the first thing or the second thing or third thing on her mind. It's what's for dinner. It's when are we going to go for a run or go to the gym. It's when should we go shopping? We've got this party and I need to go buy a dress. What do you think of this? And it's very grounding, and it's a great place to be. And especially during the intensity of a general election campaign, she's going to be very, very invaluable for taking me away from my desk, not just physically, but mentally.
Yeah. No, she's a great girl. So last point before we wrap up, a little trivia before the end of the episode.
Go on.
I ask each of my guests about some of the most favourite things in a quick fire round. And I say quick fire round, not many of my guests understand this.
Yeah, I'm going to really struggle now, but go on.
So first question, favourite food?
Pizza. Yeah.
Well,
no, I've got to change my mind. It's fried chicken. It's definitely
fried chicken. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you were to say pizza, and that was okay, maybe your second choice, what's your topping on your pizza?
Yeah, just the meatiest one that's
Yeah.
available. Like, don't want to disillusion any vegan listeners, but I think that's the best value for money. So yeah, I'm just quite like that.
Yeah. Favorite band or artist from the world of music?
Can I have two?
Go on then.
So it's Blur historically because of the Colchester link, but everything. I like they're my favorite band.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say Elton John because Chris is very good on the karaoke and one of breakfast that you never ate. You didn't eat in the end, did you?
No, we were too hungover to go get that breakfast.
Yeah. But it's a bit of a claim to fame.
Yeah.
Favorite TV program and film?
Oh,
it's got to be Love Island, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's not Love Island.
Oh, it's not
Love Island. Do you know what? I think genuinely my favourite TV program might be Bake Off. I love the Bake Off, me. And favourite film, I'm not sure if I've got one. There's too many, but the instant one that springs to mind, given the summer we're about to have, is Mike Bassett, England Manager.
Oh, great film. Yeah.
Yeah.
Up there. Favourite place in the world?
Yeah, I love Bruges. I think it really is, to quote in Bruges, a fairy tale.
Nice. Favorite famous person?
Oh, I don't know. Don't know if I've got one. Mark Tuxford, I think.
Yeah, good shout. Good shout. Favorite footballer?
Yeah, Paul Scholes was always my favourite growing up, but now I know that he bites his daughter's toenails. I'm not quite so sure.
Bites his daughter's toenails?
Did you not say it? You have to look that up after the podcast.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I'll have a look.
Yeah.
Last one. Favorite memory from your life?
Favorite memory of I should have prepared these, really, shouldn't I? You know what? Actually, yeah, I'll given the title of the podcast, I'll keep it professional. But like, there was a moment in my previous job when I was at Savanta when we were the most accurate pollster at the 2017 general election, and we were the most accurate by a long way. And I'm not really going to sit here and take credit for it. It was absolutely the call of my CEO and stuff. But professionally, that was a huge moment, and it's kind of one that you look back on and just kind of think, I don't know if I'll ever top that. Peaked a bit too early, maybe, but yeah, that was huge because striving for accuracy, but also just sticking to your guns in the face of adversity, I guess, in some respects, I think was massive, and I'm really proud to be a part of that.
Look, Chris, honestly, it's been a great little interview. Thank you for your time discussing your life lessons, obviously career to date. I love you lots. Last sort of question, but last point before we wrap up. Perhaps you'd like to tell everyone where they can access political research or find the Savanta brand.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are most active on X or formerly known as Twitter at Savanta_UK. I'm also mostly active on that platform as well at Chris Hopkins 92. Otherwise, just accessing us on our website which is just savanta.com. That's savanta.com.
Lovely, thank you again, Chris. Join us next time for a brand new guest as we continue with more.
That's it for this episode of People Behind Brands
Business.
If you like what you heard today, do yourself a favour, subscribe to our exclusive content now, and follow us on our social media when you search People Behind Brands Podcast or at Podcast PBB. Join us next time for a brand new guest as we explore more life lessons from the world of business. We'll see you soon. Ta-da!